The fluorescent lights of quantum dynamics R&D department buzzed overhead as Harold Foster stared at the equation that had consumed the last 8 years of his life. At 42, his once jet-black hair was now peppered with silver at the temples, though his sharp blue eyes retained the intensity that had earned him the nickname, the Solver, among his colleagues. "It's beautiful," whispered Damon Reed, Harold's longtime friend and lab partner. "The board will have to approve additional funding now." Harold nodded, allowing himself a rare smile. What had begun as a theoretical algorithm for optimizing energy distribution and quantum computing had evolved into something revolutionary. A mathematical framework that could transform artificial intelligence processing while reducing energy consumption by nearly 70%. "Let's hope Maxwell sees it that way," Harold replied, referring to Maxwell Bennett, the mercurial CEO who was becoming increasingly skeptical of Harold's division. "The quarterly review is tomorrow." As Harold packed up his notes, his phone buzzed with a text from his wife, Vanessa. "Working late again. Do not bother. Having dinner with Beth. Leftovers in fridge." Harold sighed, slipping the phone back into his pocket. After 15 years of marriage, communication with Vanessa had deteriorated to terse text messages and cold silences. The passionate art student he'd fallen for during their college days had transformed into someone he barely recognized. A woman obsessed with status, appearances, and the material trappings of success. "How are things with Vanessa?" Damon asked, noting Harold's expression. "Same," Harold replied with a shrug. "She'll come around once the project gets approved. She's just frustrated with the hours I've been putting in." What Harold did not mention was the growing distance between them. How Vanessa's initial support had turned into quiet resentment as his theoretical work failed to yield the immediate financial rewards she expected. How her circle of friends had shifted to the wives of executives and hedge fund managers. How she started referring to his work as his little math problems. As Harold drove home through the rain-slick streets of suburban Boston, he allowed himself to imagine what approval from the board would mean. Validation, resources, and perhaps a chance to repair his fracturing marriage. The house was dark when he arrived, save for a single light in the kitchen. Harold heated the leftover pasta and ate alone at the counter, scrolling through his presentation one final time. At 11:30 p.m., he heard Vanessa's key in the lock, followed by the familiar sound of her expensive heels clicking across the marble foyer. "You still up?" she observed, her voice slightly slurred. Her honey blonde hair was perfectly styled, and her dress, clearly new, hugged her slender frame. "Big presentation tomorrow," Harold replied, noting how she avoided his eyes. "How was dinner with Beth?" Vanessa busied herself by removing her jewelry. "Fine, the usual." Harold noticed a smudge of lipstick on her collar. The wrong shade for Vanessa. The detail registered clinically in his mind. Another variable in an equation he was not yet ready to solve. "I think the board's going to approve my project tomorrow," he offered. Maxwell seemed impressed with the preliminary results. Vanessa paused, her expression briefly softening before hardening again. "That's what you said last quarter, Harold. And the quarter before that." She kicked off her heels. "I'm going to bed." As Harold sat alone in the kitchen, his mind returned to the equation he solved earlier that day. Every problem had a solution if you identified the correct variables. His marriage, he realized, had become a problem he'd been avoiding solving. He pulled out his phone and opened an app he'd installed weeks ago, but had never activated. With a few taps, he connected it to the home security system and several discrete devices he'd placed throughout the house. Data would now flow to a secure server only he could access. If his suspicions were correct, he would soon have all the variables he needed. The boardroom of quantum dynamics fell silent as Harold concluded his presentation. The projector hummed softly, displaying his final slide, an elegant representation of the algorithm that had consumed nearly a decade of his life. Maxwell Bennett leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes unreadable. At 63, the CEO had built quantum dynamics from a startup into a technology powerhouse through a combination of visionary investments and determined business tactics. "Impressive work, Foster," Maxwell said finally. but I'm afraid we're taking the company in a different direction. Harold felt the floor drop from beneath him. Different direction? The board voted this morning. We're pivoting away from theoretical research toward more immediate commercial applications. Maxwell would not meet his eyes. Your division is being dissolved. That's absurd, Harold protested, struggling to keep his voice even. This algorithm could revolutionize. Your employment terminates effective immediately, Maxwell continued, sliding a folder across the table. Standard severance package. Security will escort you to clear out your office. The boardroom blurred around Harold as the implications crashed over him. 8 years of work, his team, his reputation, all gone. UCA not just take my research, he said, the realization dawning. Maxwell's smile did not reach his eyes. Your employment contract is quite clear, Dr. Foster. All intellectual property developed during your tenure belongs to Quantum Dynamics. As security guards appeared at the door, Harold noticed Brendan Lloyd, the company's rising star in applied AI, smirking from the corner. The pieces suddenly aligned in Harold's mind. Brendan's recent interest in his work, the unexplained access logs to his secure server, Maxwell's abrupt change of heart. You making a mistake, Harold said quietly as he was escorted out. Maxwell shrugged. Business is not theoretical, Harold. It's practical. 3 hours later, Harold sat in his car in the company parking lot. A cardboard box of personal items on the passenger seat. His phone buzzed with a text from Damon. They got me too. Whole team gone. What the heck happened? Before Harold could respond, another message appeared, this one from his home security system. Motion detected in the master bedroom at 2:17 p.m. On a whim, he opened the live feed. The image froze him. Vanessa in their bed with a man Harold recognized instantly, Brendan Lloyd. Harold's hands gripped the steering wheel as the betrayal crystallized in his mind. His work stolen. His marriage a lie. Everything he built over 15 years systematically dismantled. But even as anger coursed through him, a strange calm descended. The mathematician in him recognized that he now had all the variables of the equation, and every equation, no matter how complex, could be solved with the right approach. He started the car and drove, not toward home, but to a small patent attorney's office in Cambridge, where an old college friend practiced. Harold had been meticulous in his research methodology, keeping detailed notebooks of his process, notebooks that remained in his personal possession. More importantly, he had completed key breakthroughs while working from home on his personal equipment during unpaid weekend hours. Work technically not covered by his employment contract, if one read the fine print carefully. Theodore, Harold said when his friend answered, I need to file a provisional patent immediately, and I need absolute discretion. That night, Harold returned home at his usual time, the initial patent paperwork safely filed. He found Vanessa in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. You late, she observed without looking up. Tough day at work, Harold replied, his voice steady. Budget cuts. I might be looking at a reduction in hours. Now Vanessa looked up, irritation flashing across her features. Seriously? After all the overtime you've been putting in? Harold shrugged. Projects get cancelled. That's business. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Vanessa snapped. All those years wasted on theories that do not pay the bills. Harold noted how she did not ask how he felt, did not offer comfort. Instead, he asked, How was your day? Fine, she replied, returning to her phone. Beth and I had lunch at Maison Laurent. Another lie, another data point. I'm going to take a shower, Harold said. As the water washed over him, Harold activated the recording app on his phone and created a verbal journal entry, documenting the day's events in precise detail. Then he composed a secure email to Theodore with specific instructions to be executed if certain conditions were met. The game had changed, but Harold had always excelled at games with clear mathematical parameters. Now, for the first time in years, he had perfect clarity about the rules and the players. 3 weeks after his termination, Harold sat across from Lena Russo, a sharp-eyed venture capitalist with a reputation for backing revolutionary technologies. Let me get this straight, Lena said, tapping her crimson nails against Harold's proposal. You developed this algorithm independently of your work at quantum dynamics? Key components, yes, Harold replied. The core breakthrough occurred during unpaid weekend work on my personal equipment. I have dated and time-stamped notebooks and digital records to prove it. Lena studied him. At 50, she had built Russo Ventures through an uncanny ability to separate genuine innovation from hype. And quantum, she asked. They filed preliminary patents on a related system, Harold acknowledged, but their implementation is fundamentally flawed without the key components I developed independently. Lena's lips curved into a smile. So they re-sitting on an expensive, non-functional system. Precisely. What do you want, Dr. Foster? Revenge or success? Both, Harold answered honestly. But success is the better revenge. Lena nodded, apparently satisfied with his answer. My legal team will contact your attorney. If everything checks out, we prepare to offer $10 million for an exclusive license to your patent with royalties once the technology is commercialized. Harold maintained his composure, though his heart raced. I was thinking of something more substantial. Say $67 million for complete acquisition. Lena's eyebrows shot up. That's extremely ambitious. The potential market for this technology exceeds $200 billion within 5 years, Harold countered. And quantum dynamics will discover the fatal flaw in their implementation approximately 3 months after initial deployment. By then, whoever holds my patent will control the market. Lena studied him for a long moment before extending her hand. You re not the academic pushover Maxwell Bennett described. I think we can do business, Dr. Foster. As Harold drove home, his phone rang. Damon, you sneaky rascal, his friend said without preamble. Russo Ventures, how did you manage that? I kept good notes, Harold replied. How are things at Latent Tech? Decent, not quantum money, but they appreciate theoretical work. Damon paused. Have you heard about Maxwell's big announcement? They re-fast-tracking Brendan's breakthrough into production, calling it QD Nexus. Interesting timing, Harold remarked mildly. Harold, Damon's voice turned serious. Brendan's implementation would not work. Not fully. I reviewed it before we got axed. I know. So you just going to let them crash and burn? That's cold even for what they did to us. Harold thought of Brendan in his bed, of Maxwell's dismissive smirk. Sometimes the correct solution is not immediately obvious, Damon. At home, Harold found Vanessa waiting with uncharacteristic attentiveness. She had prepared dinner, his favorite pasta, and opened an expensive bottle of wine. I talked to Beth today, she said, pouring him a glass. Her husband works at Russo Ventures. He mentioned they looking at some revolutionary algorithm. Her eyes studied him carefully. Anything you want to tell me? Harold took a sip of wine, noting how her interest had been rekindled at the first hint of potential success. Just exploring some options, he replied non-committally. Well, I think it's great you getting back out there, she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I've always believed in your work, you know? The lie hung between them like a mathematical error, glaring and obvious. Have you? Harold asked mildly. Vanessa looked momentarily thrown, but recovered quickly. Of course. We've had rough patches, but I've always supported your career. Harold nodded, wondering if she actually believed her own revisionist history. I appreciate that, he said, extracting his hand from hers. By the way, how's Brendan doing with his new project? The color drained from Vanessa's face. Who? Brendan Lloyd. From Quantum. Beth's husband mentioned they fast-tracking his project. Oh, Vanessa recovered poorly. I would not know. Beth does not talk much about her husband's colleagues. Of course, Harold replied, taking another sip of wine. My mistake. Later that night, as Vanessa slept, Harold reviewed the data his surveillance system had collected. Phone records showed daily calls to Brendan. Location data from her phone revealed regular meetings at a hotel downtown. Text messages discussed Harold's work, his schedule, his vulnerabilities. The betrayal was methodical and calculated, qualities Harold could almost admire from a purely analytical perspective. But the coldness of it, the casual cruelty with which both Vanessa and Brendan had discussed him, crystallized his resolve. In the study, Harold opened his laptop and sent a brief, encrypted message to Theodore, proceed with Phase 2. Conditions confirmed. Then he opened a second security email account and sent detailed documentation of Brendan's flawed implementation with just enough information to make it tantalizing but not enough to fix the critical errors to 3 of quantum dynamics' largest competitors. The pieces were moving. The equation was balancing. And soon, the solution would become evident to everyone involved. 57 days after being fired, Harold sat in Theodore Mercer's law office reviewing the final acquisition contract from Russo Ventures. $67 million, Theodore whistled, his round face breaking into a smile. When you called me about that provisional patent, I never imagined this outcome. Harold nodded, his expression neutral. The technology's value speaks for itself. Still, to go from fired to one of the wealthiest men in Boston in under 2 months. Theodore trailed off. Have you told Vanessa yet? No. Harold replied, signing the final page. And I prefer to keep this confidential for now. Theodore's expression grew serious. Harold, Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. If you reconsidering what I think you reconsidering, timing and disclosure matter enormously. I'm aware, Harold said. That's why I've documented everything so meticulously. As if on cue, Harold's phone buzzed with a news alert. Quantum Dynamics announces major breakthrough. QD Nexus to revolutionize AI processing. Theodore glanced at the headline. Is not that based on your work? Partially, Harold acknowledged. But incomplete. You could sue. That would be premature, Harold replied. Let's see how the market responds first. The market responded enthusiastically. Quantum Dynamics stock jumped 28% on the announcement. Tech blogs praised Brendan Lloyd as a visionary. Maxwell Bennett gave interviews predicting QD Nexus would capture 70% of the enterprise AI market within 2 years. Through it all, Harold remained silent, observing from a distance as Vanessa's behavior subtly shifted. Her late nights with Beth decreased. She began asking questions about his job search, his meetings, his plans for the future. The surveillance system recorded multiple panicked calls to Brendan, who assured her that Harold remained clueless. On the surface, Harold played the part of the struggling, unemployed academic taking consulting jobs, interviewing for university positions, maintaining the fiction that their financial situation was becoming precarious. We might need to downsize, he mentioned casually over dinner one evening. The mortgage is becoming difficult to manage on consulting income. Vanessa's smile tightened. Surely something will come through soon. With your background? My background includes being fired for pursuing theoretical work with limited commercial applications, Harold reminded her. It's not exactly a selling point. Well, Vanessa said, setting down her fork, we need to be practical. I've been thinking about going back to work myself. That's probably wise, Harold agreed. Your art degree could open doors in multiple fields. The look Vanessa gave him contained both surprise and calculation. She had not expected his support for her employment, had perhaps anticipated an ego-driven refusal that would justify her next move. 2 days later, while Harold was supposedly at a job interview, he instead sat in a cafe across from private investigator Naomi Wright, a former cybersecurity specialist who had transitioned to investigative work. Everything's documented, Naomi confirmed, sliding a USB drive across the table. The affair began approximately 6 months ago, shortly after Lloyd was promoted at Quantum Dynamics. The communications indicate a coordinated effort to access and exploit your research. And the financial aspect? Naomi nodded. As you suspected, there's a pattern of unusual deposits to an offshore account linked to your wife. The timing correlates with key information being passed to Lloyd and subsequently to Maxwell Bennett. Harold absorbed this confirmation of what he had already deduced. Thank you for your thoroughness. There's one more thing, Naomi added. Based on recent communications, it appears your wife is preparing to file for divorce. She's consulted with attorney Preston Walsh. He specializes in high-asset divorces and has a reputation for aggressive tactics. Harold permitted himself a small smile. Perfect timing. That evening, when Harold returned home, he found Vanessa unusually attentive, preparing an elaborate dinner and wearing a dress he had not seen in years. I thought we should have a nice evening together, she explained, pouring wine with practiced grace. We've both been so stressed lately. Harold noted how she kept the conversation light, avoiding any mention of their financial situation or his job prospects. After dinner, she suggested they watch a movie, his choice, and positioned herself close to him on the sofa, her hand casually resting on his thigh. The calculated nature of the seduction was almost elegant in its transparency. Harold recognized it for what it was, a maneuver to establish marital harmony in the record, a counter to any claim he might make of abandonment or alienation. He played along, accepting her sudden affection without comment. When she initiated intimacy later that night, their first in months, Harold participated with mechanical precision, observing her actions as dispassionately as he might analyze an equation. Afterward, as she slept, Harold slipped away to his study and composed 2 emails. The first went to Theodore, instructing him to prepare specific financial documentation for the coming weeks. The second went to Russo Ventures, confirming the wire transfer of the initial payment for his patent. The pieces were aligning perfectly. Harold observed the elegant mathematical beauty of it, how each action and reaction followed a predictable pattern, how the variables were resolving according to his calculations. In 3 weeks, Quantum Dynamics would announce the first major installation of QD Nexus at global banks' data centers. 2 weeks after that, the system would fail catastrophically during peak processing hours. And precisely 1 week later, Vanessa would file for divorce, expecting to claim half of Harold's meager consulting income and leave him financially ruined while she built a new life with the soon-to-be disgraced Brendan Lloyd. But equations, Harold knew, often contained hidden variables. And he had accounted for every one of them. The moment was nearly at hand. The global bank implementation of QD Nexus failed even more spectacularly than Harold had calculated. During a critical end-of-quarter processing cycle, the system crashed, corrupting transaction data across 17 regional banking centers. The financial press called it the quantum collapse, estimating damages at over $300 million. Quantum Dynamics stock plummeted 43% in a single day. Maxwell Bennett issued a terse statement blaming unforeseen integration complexities. Behind the scenes, according to Harold's sources, Brendan Lloyd was fighting for his career, insisting the implementation had been rushed against his recommendations. Harold observed these developments with detached interest, making no public comment even as former colleagues reached out seeking his insights. To the world, he remained the dismissed theoretical mathematician, now cobbling together consulting work while his more practical rivals stumbled. At home, the charade continued. Vanessa maintained her renewed affection, though Harold noticed how frequently she checked her phone, how her smile faltered when financial news played on television. Their joint account dwindled as Harold paid bills without replacing the funds, maintaining the fiction of their approaching financial crisis. "I've been thinking," Vanessa said one evening, her voice carefully casual, "maybe we should consider a fresh start. Somewhere more affordable." "Like where?" Harold asked, looking up from his laptop. "Beth mentioned Arizona has a growing tech scene. Lower cost of living too." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting timing with the real estate market down. We did take a loss on the house." "Sometimes you have to cut your losses," Vanessa replied, the metaphor hanging heavily between them. The following day, Harold received a text from Damon, QD in freefall. "Maxwell ousted by board, rumor has it Russo Ventures announcing major acquisition next week. Tell me you read behind this." Harold did not respond directly. Instead, he called Naomi Wright. "It's time," he said when she answered. "Proceed with the documentation package." That evening, Harold returned home to find Vanessa sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand and an envelope beside her. "Preston Walsh," she said without preamble, tapping the envelope. "Best divorce attorney in Boston." Harold set down his bag. "I see. This is not working, Harold," Vanessa continued, her voice taking on a rehearsed quality. "We've grown apart. Your career setbacks have put enormous strain on our relationship. I think we both deserve a chance at happiness." "With Brendan Lloyd?" Harold asked mildly. Vanessa froze, wine glass halfway to her lips. "What?" "Your affair with Brendan Lloyd," Harold clarified. "The one that began 6 months ago, around the time he gained access to my research at Quantum Dynamics." Color drained from Vanessa's face, quickly replaced by an angry flush. "You being paranoid. This is exactly the kind of delusional, the Marquis Hotel, room 718, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon," Harold interrupted calmly. "The offshore account in the Caymans receiving payments after each major data leak from my department. The text messages discussing how to handle me once Brendan's implementation of my algorithm made him wealthy." Vanessa's expression shifted from shock to calculation. "You've been spying on me. That's illegal. Preston Walsh will receive comprehensive documentation of your conspiracy with Brendan and Maxwell to appropriate my intellectual property," Harold continued, "as will the FBI's Corporate Espionage Division and the SEC. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vanessa's features. "You bluffing. You have nothing." Harold took out his phone and played a recording, Vanessa and Brendan discussing Harold's research, planning how to access his secure server, laughing about his obliviousness. Vanessa's hand trembled, spilling wine across the envelope. "What do you want?" "An uncontested divorce," Harold replied simply. You keep your personal possessions and the offshore account Brendan established for you. Approximately $240,000, I believe. I retain everything else. That's ridiculous, Vanessa snapped. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. I'm entitled to half of everything. Half of my consulting income would be approximately $42,000 annually, Harold acknowledged. Significantly less than you've already received from Brendan. I thought you'd consider it a fair trade to avoid federal prosecution. Vanessa's legal training, abandoned after 1 year of law school when she met Harold, resurfaced. You re-threatening me. That's coercion. I'm offering you a business arrangement, Harold corrected. Similar to the one you made with Brendan, but with clearer terms. Vanessa studied him, seeing something in his expression that made her pause. The Harold she thought she knew, the distracted academic, the predictable husband, was gone, replaced by someone calculating and unfamiliar. I'll need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Harold agreed. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, the documentation package goes to the authorities. As Harold turned to leave the kitchen, Vanessa called after him. What happens to Brendan in this scenario? Harold paused at the doorway. That depends on you. Accept my terms and my focus remains on quantum dynamics as an entity. Refuse and my attention turns to individual accountability. That night, Harold slept in the guest room, his phone set to alert him to any unusual activity. At 2:17 a.m. It buzzed. Vanessa had made a call to Brendan lasting 23 minutes. At 3:05 a.m. she sent an email to Preston Walsh canceling their appointment. By morning, Vanessa had composed herself, appearing in the kitchen with forced calm. I'll accept your terms, she said. But I want them formalized legally. Theodore Mercer will contact you today with the paperwork, Harold replied, pouring coffee. You'll have full legal representation and review. You planned all of this, Vanessa observed, a note of grudging respect in her voice. I solved an equation, Harold corrected. The variables were provided by you and your associates. As Harold left for his meeting with Theodore, his phone alerted him to breaking news. Russo Ventures announces revolutionary AI algorithm, claims patent predates quantum dynamics, failed system. The market reaction was immediate and dramatic. Technology blogs that had praised Brendan Lloyd now questioned his originality. Financial analysts downgraded quantum dynamics to sell ratings. And Harold Foster's name began appearing in industry publications, described as the overlooked genius behind the true breakthrough. By that afternoon, Theodore had confirmed that Vanessa had signed the preliminary divorce agreement. She did not even argue about the terms, he reported. Though she did ask one question, whether you re-involved with Russo Ventures. What did you tell her? That I was not at liberty to discuss your business affairs, Theodore replied. Was that correct? Perfect, Harold confirmed. What's our timeline for finalization? Given the uncontested nature, we can expedite. For weeks, possibly 3. Excellent, Harold said. And the financial disclosures? Theodore's voice took on a note of concern. We'll need to disclose the Russo Ventures payment before final signing. There's no legal way around that. I'm counting on it, Harold replied. In fact, I want to schedule the disclosure and signing to coincide precisely with Russo's formal announcement of my role as Chief Algorithm Officer and Majority Patent Holder. Theodore chuckled. You really have calculated every move. Almost every move, Harold corrected. There are still variables in play. The most unpredictable of those variables manifested that evening when Harold returned home to find Brendan Lloyd waiting in his living room, Vanessa nervously standing nearby. We need to talk, Brendan said, his normally confident demeanor strained. Man to man. Harold set down his bag, assessing the situation with clinical detachment. Brendan was approximately 10 years younger, physically fit, and possibly desperate enough to resort to violence. Vanessa appeared anxious rather than triumphant, suggesting this confrontation was not her idea. I'm listening, Harold replied calmly. This vendetta has to stop, Brendan said. You've made your point. The QD Nexus failure has tanked my reputation. Is not that enough? Vendetta implies emotional motivation, Harold observed. This is simply cause and effect. Brendan's composure cracked. You sabotaged the implementation. You knew it would fail. I did nothing of the sort, Harold corrected. I merely declined to provide the complete solution to people who stole my incomplete work. We can fix this, Brendan insisted, stepping closer. A joint venture. Shared credit. There's still billions to be made if we work together. Harold smiled thinly. An interesting proposal from someone who conspired to steal my research, seduced my wife, and celebrated my professional destruction. What leverage do you imagine you have in this negotiation? Brendan's expression darkened. I have evidence of your surveillance activities. Illegal recordings. Computer trespassing. Enough to bring criminal charges. Gathered how? Harold inquired mildly. By illegally accessing my home systems? That would make for an interesting court case. The standoff stretched into uncomfortable silence before Vanessa intervened. This is pointless. Brendan Harold made his decision. We should respect that and move on. Brendan turned to her, incredulous. Move on? My career is ruined. As was mine, Harold noted. Or so you both believed. Actions have consequences, Mr. Lloyd. Some are immediate. Others take time to manifest. As Brendan's face contorted with rage, Harold added, I suggest you leave before this conversation becomes something we all regret. Vanessa has made her choice clear. And it appears to be self-preservation rather than loyalty to either of us. Vanessa flinched at the assessment but did not contradict it. After a tense moment, Brendan stormed out, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the windows. He's desperate, Vanessa said after he'd gone. Maxwell's blaming him entirely for the failure. The board is asking questions about where the algorithm really came from. That sounds like a difficult situation, Harold acknowledged without sympathy. Vanessa studied him with new awareness. You different. You've changed. No, Harold corrected. I've simply stopped pretending to be what you needed me to be. The equation balances now. That's all. 3 days before the scheduled divorce signing, Harold sat in a private dining room at Maison Laurent across from Lena Russo and her executive team. The formal announcement of his role as Russo Ventures' chief algorithm officer had been strategically timed to coincide with the final stage of his divorce, a mathematical precision that gave him quiet satisfaction. The market response has exceeded even our projections, Lena was saying, her crimson nails tapping against the quarterly report. Pre-orders for quantum flux implementation have surpassed $130 million. Your algorithm has performed flawlessly in all test environments. Harold nodded, accepting the praise with characteristic restraint. The scaling parameters still need fine-tuning for larger deployments. Always the perfectionist, Lena smiled. That's why we repaying you the big bucks, $67 million for the patent acquisition plus the equity package as CEO. Speaking of which, interjected Russo's chief financial officer, the final patent payment transfers tomorrow. Any specific instructions for the wire? Standard procedure is fine, Harold replied. My attorney has prepared the necessary documentation for tax purposes. As the meeting concluded, Lena held Harold back for a private word. I heard about your divorce proceedings. Remarkable timing. Harold met her gaze steadily. Pure coincidence. Of course, Lena's smile suggested she understood perfectly. Nothing to do with Massachusetts divorce laws and the disclosure requirements for assets acquired during marriage. Theodore has ensured everything is handled legally and transparently, Harold assured her. I never doubted it, Lena replied. I admire precision engineering in all its forms, Dr. Foster. That evening, Harold returned home to find Vanessa waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand and an expression of practiced contrition on her face. I've been thinking, she began, setting down her glass. Maybe we being hasty about this divorce. Harold set his briefcase on the side table. In what way? 15 years of marriage should not end over one mistake, Vanessa continued, her voice softening to the tone she had once used when they were dating. People change. Relationships evolve. We could try counseling. Harold observed her performance with detached interest, noting the calculated vulnerability, the precise modulation of her voice. An interesting perspective given your previous certainty. I've had time to reflect, Vanessa countered, moving closer. To remember what we once had, what we could have again. And this reflection has nothing to do with Russo Ventures' announcement tomorrow? Vanessa faltered momentarily before recovering. I do not know what you mean. The formal announcement of my role as Chief Algorithm Officer, Harold clarified. And majority patent holder for the quantum flux system. The shock that registered on Vanessa's face confirmed his suspicion she had not known. Her reconnaissance had been incomplete. You reworking with Russo Ventures? She asked, recalibrating rapidly. Since when? Since shortly after my termination from Quantum Dynamics, Harold replied. A fortunate alignment of interests. Vanessa processed this new information, her expression cycling through shock, calculation, and finally a softer, more intimate look. Harold, that's wonderful news. I always believed in your work even when others did not. The revision of history was so brazen that Harold almost admired its audacity. Did you? That contradicts your recorded statements to Brendan about my useless theories and wasted potential. Vanessa abandoned pretense, her expression hardening. What do you want, Harold? To humiliate me? To make me beg? Fine. I made a mistake. I underestimated you. Is that what you need to hear? I do not need to hear anything from you, Harold replied calmly. The divorce terms are settled. We both sign the day after tomorrow. Before I know exactly what I'm entitled to, Vanessa countered, anger replacing calculation. That SYUV expedited everything. You re-hiding assets. Nothing is hidden, Harold assured her. All assets will be properly disclosed before final signing as required by law. Then why not tell me now? What's the big secret with Russo Ventures? Harold considered her question, weighing the satisfaction of revelation against the mathematical purity of his plan. Patience, Vanessa. 2 more days and all variables will be resolved. The following morning, as Harold prepared for Russo Ventures' press conference, his phone buzzed with a message from Theodore. Emergency. Preston Walsh filed for emergency injunction on divorce proceedings. Hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. Today claims new evidence of substantial undisclosed assets. Harold had anticipated this possibility, a 17% probability in his calculations. He replied, proceed as planned. No adjustments necessary. The press conference proceeded flawlessly. Lena Russo introduced Harold as the visionary mathematician behind Quantum Flux, announcing his dual role as patent holder and chief algorithm officer. Tech journalists who had ignored him for years now clamored for quotes, eager for insights into his sudden emergence as an industry leader. Dr. Foster, how does it feel to see your theoretical work validated after quantum dynamics dismissed you? One reporter asked. Mathematics does not require validation, Harold replied. It simply is. The application proves itself. And your response to quantum dynamics claims that elements of quantum flux infringe on their intellectual property? Their claims will be addressed through proper legal channels, Harold answered. But I would note that my patent filings predate their implementation by several weeks. As the conference concluded, Harold checked his watch. 1:30 p.m. sufficient time to reach the courthouse for the emergency hearing. Theodore met him at the entrance, looking both worried and impressed. Walsh has subpoenaed records from Russo Ventures, Theodore informed him. He is arguing that you deliberately concealed your involvement during preliminary divorce discussions. Did he get the records? Harold asked. Yes, but only the initial contract information, Theodore confirmed. Not the full financial details. Perfect, Harold replied, straightening his tie. Then everything proceeds according to plan. The hearing room was small, with Judge Eleanor Graves presiding. Vanessa sat beside Preston Walsh, a shark-like attorney known for aggressive divorce litigation. Her expression suggested confident anticipation. Your Honor, Walsh began after preliminaries, we have evidence that Dr. Foster has deliberately concealed substantial assets during divorce proceedings with my client. Specifically, his involvement with Russo Ventures as patent holder and executive. Judge Graves looked to Theodore. Counselor. Your Honor, we acknowledge Dr. Foster's professional relationship with Russo Ventures, Theodore responded calmly. However, this information was scheduled for formal disclosure at tomorrow's settlement signing in full compliance with legal requirements. The timing is suspicious at best, Your Honor, Walsh countered. My client was being pressured to sign an inequitable agreement without knowledge of her husband's substantially improved financial circumstances. Is that so? Judge Graves turned to Theodore. What exactly is the nature of Dr. Foster's compensation from Russo Ventures? Theodore glanced at Harold, who nodded permission. Dr. Foster has received an executive compensation package as chief algorithm officer, and more significantly, payment for acquisition of his patent rights to the quantum flux system. And the amount of this payment? Judge Graves inquired. $67 million, Theodore stated. The final transfer was completed this morning. The courtroom fell silent. Vanessa's confident expression crumbled into shock. Preston Walsh recovered first. Your Honor, this is precisely our point. Dr. Foster was attempting to push through a divorce settlement offering Mrs. Foster only her personal possessions and a small offshore account while concealing a $67 million asset. Is this accurate, Counselor? Judge Graves asked Theodore. Not entirely, Your Honor, Theodore replied. The full financial disclosure was scheduled for tomorrow's signing before any agreement would become final. More importantly, the patent acquisition payment was not marital property under Massachusetts law. Explain, Judge Graves demanded. The patent was filed after Dr. Foster's termination from Quantum Dynamics, Theodore clarified. More significantly, the critical development work occurred after Mrs. Foster had engaged in a documented affair with Brendan Lloyd of Quantum Dynamics, during which she provided Mr. Lloyd with proprietary information from Dr. Foster's research. Judge Graves' expression sharpened. Do you have evidence of this allegation? Extensive documentation, Your Honor, Theodore confirmed, producing a sealed packet, including recordings of conversations between Mrs. Foster and Mr. Lloyd discussing the exploitation of Dr. Foster's intellectual property, bank records of payments to Mrs. Foster coinciding with data breaches and sworn statements from former Quantum Dynamics employees. Walsh leapt to his feet. Objection. This is an ambush, Your Honor. These allegations are completely unrelated to the matter at hand. On the contrary, Theodore countered. They are directly relevant to determining whether the patent acquisition constitutes marital property subject to equitable distribution. Under Massachusetts law, assets acquired through illegal activity or breach of fiduciary duty to a spouse may be excluded from distribution. Judge Graves studied the presented documents for several long minutes while the courtroom remained silent. Finally, she looked up. I'm dismissing the motion for emergency injunction, she announced. Based on preliminary review, there appears to be substantial evidence that Mrs. Foster engaged in activities that constitute a breach of fiduciary duty to her spouse. The scheduled settlement signing may proceed tomorrow as planned. As Vanessa and Walsh huddled in an urgent consultation, Judge Graves added, I should note that I will be referring the evidence of corporate espionage to the appropriate authorities for potential criminal investigation. Court adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Theodore could barely contain his admiration. The timing was masterful, he told Harold. Her own aggressive move gave us the perfect opportunity to introduce the espionage evidence into the official record. Harold nodded. Mathematical precision. The variables aligned as calculated. She'll still try to fight it, Theodore warned. Walsh would not give up easily. Fighting means public disclosure of her affair and corporate espionage, Harold observed. Her offshore account becomes evidence rather than an asset. The equation balances in either scenario. As predicted, by that evening, Theodore received notification that Vanessa had agreed to proceed with the original settlement terms. The message included a personal note, tell Harold he wins. I underestimated him. But this is not over. Harold read the message without visible reaction, though he noted the implicit threat for future calculation. Some equations extended beyond their apparent solutions. 6 months after the divorce, Harold Foster's life had achieved a new equilibrium. As chief algorithm officer at Russo Ventures, he led a team of mathematicians developing applications for quantum flux across multiple industries. His personal wealth, carefully managed through a series of trusts and investments, exceeded $100 million. And his modest penthouse in Boston's Seaport District provided both comfort and strategic isolation from his former social circles. The mathematical precision of his existence pleased him. Each day was optimized for productivity, creativity, and controlled relaxation. The variables that had once complicated his equations, Vanessa, quantum dynamics, social expectations, had been eliminated or neutralized through careful calculation. Then Riley entered his life, disrupting his carefully constructed equilibrium. Riley Bennett, Maxwell Bennett's 27-year-old daughter, approached Harold after his keynote address at the International Symposium on Quantum Computing. Dr. Foster, she said, extending her hand. Your presentation was brilliant. The potential applications for healthcare alone are revolutionary. Harold recognized her immediately, the sharp intelligence in her gray eyes mirroring her father's. Though without the ruthless calculation he had come to associate with Maxwell Bennett. M.S. Bennett, he acknowledged, shaking her hand. I'm surprised to see a Bennett at my presentation. Former Bennett, she corrected. I dropped the name after my father's disgrace. It's Riley Cochran now, my mother's maiden name. A practical decision, Harold observed. A principled one, Riley countered. I never approved of my father's business tactics. When the truth about how he handled your research emerged, I resigned from Quantum Dynamics' legal department immediately. Harold recalled seeing her name in personnel files during his surveillance of the company but had paid little attention. Another variable insufficiently analyzed. What can I do for you, MS? Cochran, he asked, his tone neutral. I have information, she replied. About your ex-wife and Brendan Lloyd. Information that might interest you. Harold's carefully constructed indifference faltered momentarily. I've moved beyond those concerns. Have you? Riley's expression suggested she knew better. They certainly have not moved beyond their concerns about you. The exchange led to coffee, which extended to dinner, during which Riley revealed that Vanessa and Brendan had relocated to Arizona, where they were attempting to rebuild their lives and careers. And, more significantly, were actively seeking ways to undermine Harold's success at Russo Ventures. They approached multiple quantum dynamics investors, Riley explained, claiming they can prove you stole proprietary research. They were trying to build support for a civil suit. Their evidence would be inadmissible, Harold replied, unperturbed and counterproductive to their own interests. Desperation makes people irrational, Riley observed. My father taught me that, if nothing else. Harold studied her, the forthright gaze, the precise language, the obvious intelligence. Why are you telling me this, Ms. Cochran? What's your interest in my situation? Professional curiosity? Initially, she admitted. Your mathematical dismantling of quantum dynamics was elegant. But then I reviewed the complete case file and recognized something familiar. Which was? A fellow survivor, Riley said simply. Someone who refused to be defined by others' betrayal. The conversation shifted to her own experiences, growing up with Maxwell Bennett's ruthless approach to business and relationships, watching her mother crumble under his psychological manipulation. Finally breaking free by building her own career in technology law. By the evening's end, Harold found himself recalibrating his equations to include this new variable. Riley Cochran was neither an adversary nor a romantic prospect, categories he had largely dismissed from his calculations. She was something else entirely, a potential ally with complementary skills and motivations. I should warn you, Harold said as they parted. Association with me carries certain complications. Riley smiled. I specialize in complications, Dr. Foster. Particularly those involving intellectual property and corporate ethics. 2 weeks later, Riley joined Russo Ventures as special counsel for intellectual property, reporting directly to Lena Russo. Her first project, strengthening the company's patent protections against potential challenges from quantum dynamics or its proxies. The professional relationship between Harold and Riley remained strictly collegial, though they occasionally shared meals to discuss strategy. Harold appreciated her legal insights and found her company intellectually stimulating, a variable that enhanced rather than disrupted his equations. Then the equilibrium shattered with a single phone call. Dr. Foster, Naomi Wright's voice carried unusual urgency. We have a situation. Your surveillance systems detected unauthorized access to your home network. Harold frowned. Source. That's the concerning part, Naomi replied. The intrusion originated from Russo Ventures' internal network. Someone inside the company is accessing your personal data. The implications cascaded through Harold's mind, a breach of his carefully controlled security, an internal threat, potential compromise of both personal and professional systems. Can you isolate the specific access point? He asked, already calculating probabilities. Not precisely, Naomi admitted, but the timing and clearance levels suggest executive suite involvement. Harold's analysis quickly narrowed the possibilities. Only 5 people at Russo Ventures had sufficient clearance to potentially orchestrate such access. Lena Russo herself, the CTO, the head of security, the CFO, and most recently, Riley Cochran. A new equation formed in Harold's mind, incorporating this troubling variable. Trust had never been a significant factor in his calculations. He had structured his security systems with the assumption that all actors would eventually pursue self-interest. But the particular timing of this breach suggested something more targeted. Deploy countermeasure protocol Delta, he instructed Naomi. Controlled misinformation through all potentially compromised channels. I want to see where it leads. The countermeasure was elegant in its simplicity, subtly altered data placed in specific locations within Harold's supposedly secure systems, each variant tagged with invisible markers that would identify its path if leaked or accessed. Within 48 hours, the strategy bore fruit. One data package containing apparent vulnerabilities in quantum flux's security architecture appeared in a secure message sent from Riley Cochran's Russo Ventures account to an anonymous recipient using advanced encryption. Harold studied the evidence with mathematical detachment, calculating the most probable scenarios. Either Riley was working directly with Vanessa and Brendan, or she was being manipulated by someone else within Russo Ventures. The personal betrayal was irrelevant to his calculations. The potential threat to quantum flux was not. Rather than confronting Riley immediately, Harold implemented the next phase of his countermeasure, a subtle modification to the quantum flux architecture that would appear to exploit the vulnerability he had allowed to leak. but would actually trigger a traceable event when accessed. The stage was set for the next move. He then waited, monitoring all systems with heightened vigilance, calculating probabilities, and planning responses for each potential outcome. 3 days later, as Harold worked late in his office at Russo Ventures, Riley appeared at his door. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Privately." Harold gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I'm listening." Riley closed the door and sat down, her expression unreadable. "Someone's trying to sabotage quantum flux. They've approached me with what they claim is evidence of fundamental flaws in the architecture." Harold's expression remained neutral. "Interesting. And you retelling me this because?" "Because I think it's a setup," Riley replied, placing a secure tablet on his desk. "The supposed vulnerability is too convenient, too precisely targeted to undermine investor confidence without actually damaging functionality." Harold accepted the tablet, reviewing information he had himself created and allowed to leak. "Who approached you?" "Anonymous contact," Riley explained. "But the communication patterns matched those used by Brendan Lloyd during internal quantum dynamics projects. I recognized the syntax from legal reviews I conducted." A new variable entered Harold's calculations, the possibility that Riley was playing a double game, revealing partial information to gauge his response while concealing her own involvement. "What do you propose?" he asked, watching her carefully. "A trap," Riley answered simply. "We modify the system to appear vulnerable where they expect, but with monitoring protocols to identify the source of any attempted exploitation." Harold almost smiled. She was proposing precisely what he had already implemented. Either she was extremely intuitive or she was attempting to position herself favorably while knowing of the existing countermeasure. "An elegant solution," he acknowledged. "How would you suggest we proceed?" Quietly, Riley advised. "If there's an internal leak at Russo Ventures, we need to identify it before taking official action." Harold nodded. "I'll consider your recommendation. In the meantime, maintain normal operations and report any further contacts." After Riley left, Harold contacted Naomi Wright with new instructions. The equation had grown more complex, requiring additional variables and calculations. If Riley was indeed working against him, her apparent disclosure created a new layer of misdirection. If she was genuine, then someone else had attempted to use her as an unwitting conduit. Either way, the game had entered a new phase, one requiring even greater precision and control. That night, as Harold reviewed security logs from his penthouse, a notification appeared on his secure server. The trap he had set in quantum flux had been triggered. Someone had attempted to access the system using the precise vulnerability he had planted. The trace data showed an unexpected origin: Lena Russo's private terminal. The revelation caused Harold to recalculate his entire approach. The true adversary was far closer than he had previously assumed. Lena had been the one who approached him initially, who had offered the substantial payment for his patent, who had positioned him prominently within Russo Ventures. Her motives had seemed purely commercial, leveraging his breakthrough for market advantage against quantum dynamics. But if she was now attempting to compromise quantum flux, the equation changed fundamentally. Was she hedging against potential failure? Seeking control mechanisms to limit his influence? Or implementing a more sophisticated strategy he had not yet discerned? Harold sent an encrypted message to Theodore Mercer, instructing him to prepare specific legal contingencies. Then he composed a separate secure communication to a contact he had cultivated at the SEC, a mathematician turned financial regulator who appreciated the elegant patterns of corporate malfeasance. The following morning, Harold proceeded to Russo Ventures as usual, his external demeanor betraying nothing of his recalculated strategy. He attended scheduled meetings, reviewed technical implementations, and maintained normal interactions with all colleagues, including both Riley and Lena. At 2:17 p.m., precisely when the daily executive backup protocol initiated, Harold's countermeasure activated. A subtle data packet inserted into the backup stream would document any unauthorized access or modification. By 4:30 p.m., he had his answer. Lena had accessed the backup, extracted specific components of quantum flux, and transmitted them to an external server. The destination, when traced by Naomi's specialized tools, resolved to a shell company with connections to Maxwell Bennett's new venture capital firm. The pattern clarified in Harold's mind, not a betrayal by Riley, but a complex maneuver by Lena Russo in coordination with Maxwell Bennett, likely predating Harold's involvement with the company. The patent acquisition, the prominent position, the strategic announcement, all designed to legitimize quantum flux while allowing them to extract its core functionality for deployment through Bennett's new enterprise. Riley appeared at his office door just as Harold completed his analysis. "We need to talk," she said for the second time in 24 hours. "My office. Now." Harold followed her to her more secure legal suite where she activated comprehensive privacy protocols before speaking. "Lena is working with my father," she stated without preamble. "They've been planning this since before they approached you. Your algorithm was always the target." "You have evidence?" Harold asked, revealing nothing of his own discoveries. Riley nodded, producing a secured drive. "Internal communications, financial transfers, corporate structure documents. They created a shell within a shell to distance themselves. But I recognized my father's legal templates." "Why are you showing me this?" Harold inquired, still calculating probabilities. "Because I've spent my entire life watching my father destroy people who created actual value," Riley answered, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Because Lena Russo approached me 6 months ago to use my connection to you for their benefit. Because I'm tired of intelligence and creativity being exploited by those who produce nothing themselves." Harold studied her, recalculating variables and probabilities. "When did you realize I knew?" Riley's surprise appeared genuine. "You knew? For how long?" "The relevant question is what you intend to do with this information," Harold redirected. "Stop them," Riley replied simply. "Legally, definitively, and publicly. I have enough evidence for SEC action. But your position as patent holder and algorithm creator makes you the essential witness." Harold considered his options, the various equations branching into multiple potential solutions. After a measured silence, he made his decision. "I have additional evidence," he said, removing a secure drive from his pocket. "And a strategy already in motion." Riley's expression shifted from surprise to something like admiration. "You were ahead of me from the beginning." "Not entirely," Harold acknowledged. "Your involvement was an unanticipated variable. A beneficial one, as it happens." Together, they reviewed their combined evidence and refined Harold's strategy. By evening, a comprehensive case had been prepared for regulatory and law enforcement action, timed precisely to coincide with Russo Ventures' upcoming investor conference. The mathematics of justice, Harold reflected, required as much precision as any other equation. The Russo Ventures investor conference proceeded exactly as planned until it did not. Lena Russo had just concluded her opening remarks, praising the company's revolutionary quantum flux technology and introducing Harold as the visionary behind it when federal agents entered the ballroom. Lena Russo, the lead agent, announced, "You're under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft." The ballroom erupted in chaos as investors and journalists witnessed the CEO being handcuffed at her own conference. Harold remained seated on the stage, his expression neutral as he observed the mathematical precision of justice unfolding. Riley, positioned strategically near the exit, nodded almost imperceptibly to Harold before slipping out to coordinate with the legal team they had prepared. The equations were resolving exactly as calculated. Within hours, the financial press had the complete story. Lena Russo and Maxwell Bennett had conspired to acquire Harold's revolutionary algorithm through Russo Ventures while simultaneously establishing a shadow company to exploit the technology without royalty obligations. The elaborate scheme had unraveled due to the meticulous documentation provided by Harold Foster and Riley Cochran. The consequences rippled outward through the industry, a testament to the power of calculated precision when combined with unwavering resolve. Harold watched the coverage from his penthouse, noting how the narrative aligned with his calculations. His reputation would emerge enhanced, the brilliant mathematician who had overcome betrayal at quantum dynamics only to face similar treachery at Russo Ventures, yet whose integrity and innovation remained uncompromised. More significantly, as majority patent holder, his control of quantum flux remained absolute. With Russo Ventures in disarray, he was positioned to guide the technology's future implementation on his own terms. The phone call from Theodore came just as Harold had predicted at precisely 8:17 p.m. "The SEC is formally requesting your testimony," Theodore reported. "And 3 major venture funds have already reached out about acquiring the quantum flux implementation rights now that Russo is compromised." As expected, Harold acknowledged. "What about the Arizona situation?" "Vanessa and Brendan are in full retreat," Theodore confirmed. "The evidence linking them to corporate espionage at Quantum Dynamics has been forwarded to authorities there." Arrest warrants are pending. Harold absorbed this information without visible reaction, though he noted a subtle statistical anomaly in his emotional response, a 3% deviation from his calculated satisfaction parameter. "And Riley?" he inquired, identifying the variable potentially responsible for the deviation. "Cooperating fully with authorities," Theodore replied. "Her testimony against her father is particularly damaging. She is positioning herself as the whistleblower who exposed the conspiracy. That's consistent with our strategy," Harold noted. "There's one more thing," Theodore added, his tone shifting. "Personal rather than legal. Riley asked me to give you a message. The equation remains incomplete." The cryptic statement lingered in Harold's mind after the call ended. The mathematics of human interaction had always been his least precise calculation, too many variables, too many irrational elements. Riley Cochran represented a particular challenge to his equations, introducing factors he had deliberately excluded from his calculations after Vanessa's betrayal. The following morning, as Harold prepared for his SEC testimony, a secure message arrived from an anonymous source. The encryption pattern matched Riley's legal department protocols, but the content was unexpected. "Maxwell claims you stole the core algorithm from classified research at Princeton. Says he has proof that would invalidate your patent. Meeting him today at Meridian Hotel, 2 p.m. to assess credibility. Proceeding alone to maintain deniability. Will advise." Harold immediately recognized the trap. Maxwell Bennett was too strategic to make such a claim without preparation, too cautious to meet directly while under investigation. The message was either Riley being manipulated or someone manipulating Harold through Riley's protocols. Either way, the Meridian Hotel at 2 p.m. represented an unacceptable risk variable. Harold began formulating a response, determined not to let the equation slip out of his control. Harold activated his secure line to Naomi Wright. "I need surveillance at the Meridian Hotel, all entrances, priority target identification for Maxwell Bennett, Riley Cochran, and any known associates of Vanessa or Brendan Lloyd." "You suspect a convergence?" Naomi inquired. "I calculate a 78% probability," Harold confirmed, "and a 64% probability of hostile intent." While Naomi deployed her surveillance team, Harold contacted Theodore with specific legal preparations, then reached out directly to his SEC contact with a confidential update. The equation was balancing toward a conclusive resolution, but required precise timing and control of key variables. At 1:17 p.m., Harold received Naomi's first surveillance report. No sign of Maxwell Bennett, but Riley had entered the hotel at 12:45 p.m., accompanied by an unidentified male subject. Facial recognition was attempting to match the individual against known databases. At 1:32 p.m., the match came through: Alexander Foster, Harold's estranged younger brother. The revelation forced Harold to recalculate all variables immediately. Alexander, who had struggled with addiction and financial difficulties throughout adulthood, had been absent from Harold's life for nearly 7 years, following a particularly destructive episode that had resulted in Harold cutting financial support. The introduction of Alexander into the equation created multiple new probability branches, none of them favorable. Harold's brother possessed just enough knowledge of his early research to potentially support Maxwell's fraudulent claims while having sufficient motivation, financial desperation, resentment to participate in such a scheme. Harold adjusted his strategy accordingly, instructing Naomi to maintain surveillance while he personally proceeded to the Meridian Hotel with modified security protocols. The direct approach carried certain risks but allowed greater control of the rapidly evolving variables. As Harold's car approached the hotel at 1:52 p.m., Naomi reported new developments. Riley and Alexander had been joined by a third individual, now identified as Preston Walsh, Vanessa's former divorce attorney. The pattern clarified in Harold's mind: not a trap set by Maxwell Bennett, but a desperate counterattack orchestrated by Vanessa and Brendan, using Alexander as a false witness and Riley as an unwitting conduit. Preston Walsh's presence suggested legal documentation was being prepared, possibly affidavits or declarations to support fraudulent claims against Harold's patent. Rather than entering through the main lobby, Harold accessed the hotel through the service entrance using security credentials Naomi had arranged. Following her guidance through a secure earpiece, he navigated to the mezzanine level overlooking the hotel bar where the meeting was taking place. From his elevated position, Harold observed the tableau below. Riley, Alexander, and Walsh deep in hushed conversation, documents spread across the table, their body language a mixture of tension, urgency, and calculation. Riley was seated across from Alexander and Preston Walsh, her expression revealing growing skepticism as Alexander gesticulated dramatically. Walsh appeared to be recording the conversation, occasionally sliding documents across the table. Audio intercept established, Naomi's voice confirmed in Harold's earpiece. Your brother is claiming you based your algorithm on classified research he witnessed while visiting you at Princeton 15 years ago. Walsh is preparing an affidavit and Riley's response. Harold inquired softly. Requesting specific details, dates, technical specifications, Naomi reported. She appears to be methodically exposing inconsistencies in his account. Harold nodded to himself, recalculating variables. Riley's behavior suggested she had not been compromised but was independently investigating the claim, precisely what her legal training would dictate. Alexander, predictably, was floundering under specific questioning about mathematical concepts he had never understood. Is there evidence of Vanessa or Brendan's direct involvement? Harold asked. Financial trail only, Naomi confirmed. Alexander received a wire transfer of $50,000 from an offshore account linked to Brendan 3 days ago. The final variable resolved in Harold's mind. This was not merely a desperate countermove by Vanessa and Brendan. It was their last play, a final attempt to undermine his credibility before their own legal consequences materialized. Harold made his decision, activating the recording function on his secure phone before descending to the hotel bar. The mathematical precision of his timing was perfect. He approached just as Alexander was struggling to explain a fundamental concept of quantum distribution algorithms. Perhaps I can clarify that point, Harold said, sliding into the empty chair beside Riley. Hello, Alexander. It's been some time. The color drained from Alexander's face. Preston Walsh froze mid-sentence, his professional composure cracking visibly. Only Riley appeared unsurprised, a faint smile suggesting she had anticipated this development. Harold, Alexander stammered. I was just explaining to Ms. Cochran about classified research I supposedly conducted at Princeton. Research that would have been difficult to accomplish given that I was never involved in classified projects during my time there, Harold finished for him. Walsh attempted to regain control. Your brother has signed a sworn statement obtained through documented bribery, Harold interrupted, placing his phone on the table to display the financial transfer records Naomi had provided. $50,000 from Brendan Lloyd's Cayman account to Alexander Foster, dated 3 days ago. A clear violation of multiple statutes. Walsh's expression hardened. That proves nothing about the validity of his testimony. Perhaps not, Harold acknowledged. But the Princeton University records confirming Alexander was banned from campus following a public intoxication incident during his only visit to me there might prove relevant. As would his documented whereabouts during the period he claims to have witnessed my research, specifically his stay at the Clearview Rehabilitation Center from October 2010 through March 2011. Alexander's face contorted with a mixture of shame and rage. You sanctimonious jerk. You always have to win, do not you? Always have to be the perfect one. This is not about winning, Alexander, Harold replied calmly. It's about mathematical truth. Equations balance or they do not. Yours does not. Riley intervened before Alexander could respond. Mr. Walsh, I suggest you advise your clients, both present and absent, that pursuing this fraudulent claim would constitute multiple felonies. The documentation we've already gathered is sufficient for criminal charges. Walsh's legal training reasserted itself as he calculated his own risk exposure. I was merely exploring the credibility of allegations brought to my attention, he said, gathering his papers. No formal filing has been made. Yet you prepared falsified affidavits and traveled across state lines to obtain them, Riley noted. Interesting legal strategy. As Walsh and Alexander made their hasty departure, Riley turned to Harold. You knew I was conducting a counter-investigation. I calculated a 72% probability, Harold confirmed. The alternative scenarios required preparation. Riley smiled. Always the mathematician. It's the only reliable framework, Harold replied, particularly given recent events. Speaking of which, Riley said, producing a secure tablet. I've been analyzing the quantum flux implementation options post-Russo. There's an elegant solution that preserves your control while maximizing both short and long-term value. As they discussed the technical and legal aspects of quantum flux's future, Harold found himself recalculating certain personal variables. Riley Cochran represented something he had deliberately excluded from his equations after Vanessa's betrayal, a potential ally whose motivations aligned with his own not through manipulation or self-interest, but through genuine intellectual and ethical compatibility. The mathematical implications were significant enough to warrant further analysis. 1 year after the Russo Ventures collapse, Harold Foster stood at the observation window of Foster Quantum Systems' new research facility in Cambridge. Below, teams of mathematicians and engineers worked on various applications of quantum flux technology, from healthcare diagnostics to climate modeling. Behind him, Riley reviewed final preparations for the afternoon's announcement, the formation of the Foster Foundation for Mathematical Innovation, endowed with $100 million from Harold's personal fortune and dedicated to supporting theoretical research without immediate commercial applications. The press package is ready, Riley confirmed. Theodore has reviewed all legal aspects of the endowment structure. Harold nodded, turning from the window. And the other matter? The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next week, Riley replied. Based on their plea agreements, Vanessa and Brendan will serve between 4 and 6 years. Maxwell and Lena are looking at 8 to 10 for the securities fraud. Harold absorbed this information without visible reaction, though he noted his internal satisfaction parameter had stabilized at optimal levels. The equation had balanced precisely as calculated, justice administered through systemic mechanisms rather than personal vengeance. Alexander, he inquired, completed his 90-day rehabilitation program, Riley reported. The counselor's assessment suggests genuine progress this time. He asked again about meeting with you. Harold considered the variable carefully. His brother represented an irrational element in his otherwise ordered existence, unpredictable, emotional, historically destructive. Yet the mathematical model he had constructed for his life felt incomplete without resolution of this particular parameter. Schedule it for next month, he decided. After the foundation launch. Riley nodded, making a note before regarding him thoughtfully. You've created something remarkable here, Harold. Quantum flux is revolutionizing fields from medicine to environmental science. The foundation will support theoretical work that might never have found funding otherwise. Mathematical precision applied to human problems, Harold acknowledged. The purest form of problem solving. Is that how you see what happened with Vanessa and quantum dynamics? Riley asked. Just variables in an equation? Harold considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. The mathematics provided the framework, he said finally. But the motivation came from something less rational. Something I'm still calculating. Riley smiled. Some variables resist precise measurement. So I've discovered, Harold agreed, his expression softening fractionally. As they proceeded to the auditorium for the foundation announcement, Harold reflected on the complex equation his life had become. The betrayals by Vanessa, quantum dynamics, and Russo Ventures had been balanced by precisely calibrated consequences. His intellectual work had found its optimal application. His financial security had been established on unassailable terms. Yet something in Riley's question lingered in his mind, the implication that some aspects of human experience transcended mathematical modeling. That perhaps his elegant solution had resolved the variables but not fully balanced the equation of his life. The auditorium was filled with journalists, academics, and technology leaders. As Harold took the podium, he surveyed the assembly with the detached perspective that had defined his approach to human interaction since Vanessa's betrayal. He adjusted the microphone, ready to apply order to complexity one final time, this time through vision rather than vengeance. The Foster Foundation for Mathematical Innovation begins with a simple premise, he stated. That theoretical work deserves support even without immediate practical application. That pursuing knowledge for its own sake has intrinsic value. As he continued outlining the Foundation's mission, Harold noticed a familiar figure entering at the back of the auditorium, Damon Reed, his former colleague from quantum dynamics, now leading his own research team at MIT. Their eyes met briefly, and Damon gave a slight nod of acknowledgement. Another variable finding its place in the equation. In mathematics, we seek perfect balance, Harold concluded. Equations that resolve elegantly without remainder or approximation. In life, such perfection is rarely achieved. But we continue calculating, adjusting variables, seeking solutions that, if not perfect, are at least true. The press conference that followed was managed with characteristic efficiency by Riley, who fielded questions with legal precision while Harold provided technical clarification where necessary. As the event concluded, she joined him at the side exit. "Dinner tonight," she suggested, to celebrate the foundation launch. Harold considered the invitation. Their professional relationship had evolved over the past year into something more complex, not romantic in conventional terms, but a connection based on mutual respect, shared perspectives, and complementary strengths. A variable that had become increasingly central to his calculations. "Yes," he agreed. "That would be mathematical." Riley laughed, the sound genuine and unrehearsed. "Only you would describe dinner as mathematical, Harold." As they left the building, Harold reflected on the elegant solution his life had become. The betrayals that had once threatened to destroy him had instead been transformed into the foundation of unprecedented success. Those who had conspired against him now faced the precise consequences of their actions. And he had emerged not merely victorious but fundamentally transformed, not the naive academic exploited by those around him, but a strategist who understood the mathematical patterns underlying human behavior. The equation had balanced perfectly. Yet as Riley discussed potential restaurants for their celebration, Harold found himself calculating a new variable. The possibility that perfect mathematical balance might be just the beginning of a more complex equation, one that included parameters he had previously excluded from his calculations: trust, connection, perhaps even forgiveness for some, though never for those who had betrayed him most profoundly. The mathematician in him recognized that such an equation would never resolve with perfect elegance. Human variables were too unpredictable, too irrational for absolute precision. But as Harold stepped out into the crisp Cambridge evening, he realized that was precisely what made the next phase of his life so full of promise and perhaps even joy. But as they reached Riley's car, and she turned to him with a smile that contained both intelligence and genuine warmth, Harold permitted himself to consider that some equations were worth calculating, even without guarantee of a perfect solution. "What are you thinking about?" Riley asked, noting his contemplative expression. "Variables," Harold replied simply. "Always the mathematician," she observed. "It's the only framework I trust," Harold acknowledged. "Not the only one," Riley corrected gently. "Just the one you've relied on so far." As they drove away from the research facility he had built from the ashes of betrayal, Harold considered her observation. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps there were frameworks beyond pure mathematics that might prove valuable in the next phase of his calculations. The thought was simultaneously unsettling and intriguing, a new variable to consider, a new equation to solve. The mathematician in him could not resist the challenge.